Hello everyone and welcome back to the Champions Showdown. We are showing a game that has a lot of meaning for the standings of the entire tournament, and well, Peter Svidler in general had a lot to say for the entire standings of the tournament. But we're going to talk a little bit about that later, as the game is very interesting and we should definitely check it out. So without further ado, Magnus with the white pieces opens with d4, and just nothing out of the ordinary here. It's a pretty weird position. We don't have like both bishops on one side of the board and both knights here. Like it's rook, knight, bishop, knight, and here the rook and bishop are here in the corner, which means that you can easily just castle here. So here Magnus opens with the d4 and d5 by Svidler. But I will just mention in the game Caruana versus Alireza Firouzja, Fabi said that he analyzed the game afterwards and that after Firouzja played d6, Caruana just castled here, and that Firouzja actually could gain almost a winning advantage by playing g5. He didn't play it, but it's really crazy how things like this can happen in Chess960. And the reason is, although it looks very odd that this would be close to winning, as Fabi said, it's actually, well, very straightforward. For example, if white continues developing, let's say c3, strengthening the center as the bishop attacks it, you just go f5. And now you have clear ideas of what to do. White will continue developing, but it's hard for white to develop, and it's incredibly easy for black to develop. You can play f4, you can bring the queen over to h5, you can bring the knight into the game easily, knight here, somewhere here, and it's just a very tough position for white to play. So just to give you a taste of what can happen. But here Svidler went for d5 and knight b to c3 now by Magnus. We have c6 and the immediate e4, so sort of a Scotch 960. And by doing this, you open up this diagonal, which Svidler will use, as you might imagine from the thumbnail. We have b6, and here of course, you do not want to meet bishop to a6 check while the king is still here on f1. There would be no way to block this. You would have to, I mean, give up a lot of material, including the queen. Okay, you could block with the knight, however, but it's not very pleasant. So here we have castles, and now bishop to a6, saying, okay, your rook is under attack. Do you want to move back the knight? If you move back the knight, then nothing is defending your pawn. But this is exactly what Magnus wanted. And here he gives up the exchange by also grabbing a pawn. So e captures on d5. Svidler accepts the rook. We have bishop captures on f1 and queen captures. And now if you grab, then Magnus just wins back the pawn. And he gains an extra pawn. And we'll have an incredibly strong light square bishop for the sacrificed exchange. So here, Svidler castles instead, and the g3 now, opening up this beautiful light square diagonal. e6 now forcing Magnus to capture, as otherwise Svidler would just win back his pawn. So d captures, knight b captures, and the immediate d5, making sure the bishop becomes fully operational. So e captures on d5, knight captures, and now knight to e6, and now knight 1 to e3. So Magnus getting a lot of development in for his sacrificed exchange, and you still need to figure out how to get this rook into the game, and also you have to play g6 at some point to make this bishop come alive. So here, rook to d8. You could also play f5, f4, try to go for an immediate aggressive attack, but Svidler goes for rook to d8 instead, and here Magnus has a very interesting idea. Magnus played queen to c4 here, but there is one move that is incredibly strong, but it's so counterintuitive that it's, well, incredibly difficult to find. So, you know, if you want, have at it while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting such a ridiculously hard move to find. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's b3. And b3 is incredibly strong because it will take advantage of black's dark square weaknesses, which are present, because it's very hard for black to counter this bishop to b2 move. Also, bishop to a3 is very strong, as this rook is still stuck on f8. And if you go for g6, which seems like the most appropriate thing to do, I mean, why not? You open up your bishop with tempo. Bishop to a3 is just crushing for white, because now you really don't have a good move, and you cannot capture the rook, and white will capture this rook whenever white wants. There are also some very nasty threats. For example, if you go for bishop captures, then comes queen captures, and now the queen controls this entire diagonal. Knight to f6 check is the threat of winning the queen. Knight g4 followed by knight to h6 is the threat of checkmate. So it would be incredibly difficult for white to play this. So b3, incredibly sneaky, but hard to find. So queen c4 by Magnus. And now Svidler takes this opportunity to trade off some pieces. Knight e7 goes after the knight, captures with check, Svidler recaptures, and knight to d5 now, getting the other knight to this very strong outpost. Queen to d7, and now bishop to e3. So it took Magnus a few more moves to get this dark square bishop into the game. But if you don't find that b3 idea, this is the way to go. So rook f to e8, and now a4. Preparing a5 to open up the a file for his rook. And now finally g6, opening up this dark square bishop. Carlsen blocks it with c3, and the bishop to g7 now. It's just a much more natural square for the bishop. Also, you guard the h6 square, so you don't have to worry about any future bishop to h6 ideas. We have bishop to f3 by Magnus. He also wants to increase the activity of his bishop. Also, bishop g4 might be an idea at some point, maybe trying to provoke f5. But here, rook to c8, attacking Carlsen's queen. Queen to b5, now offering a trade. Makes sense, as you want to open up this a file for your rook. But rook e to d8. Svidler says, okay, we can trade, but on my terms. Now Carlsen goes queen back to b4 with the threat of knight e7 check, picking up the rook here. So knight to c5, blocking the queen's access to the e7 square. a5 by Magnus, and now knight to d3, which is very nice. Attacks the queen. If the queen moves, attacks the b2 pawn. Also has some ideas of shifting the knight over to e5 to go after the bishop, but Carlsen moves the queen again with tempo. Queen h4, again going for the e7 jump. But now Svidler finds the beautiful knight to e5. And now you can't go for this check because after king f8 you just lose the knight. Because if you capture the rook, captures on f3, wins the queen. So here instead we have bishop back to g2. Carlsen needs to waste a move to get his bishop to safety. And now rook to c4. Again, getting the rook out of harm's way. With tempo, the queen is under attack. And here, Magnus just offers a queen trade. You could keep the queens on the board with f4, but Magnus doesn't mind trading. So queen e7, captures with check, king to f8, and now knight back to d5, keeping the centralized knight here and putting pressure on the b6 pawn. So here, knight to d7, adding a defender here. And Svidler calculates properly that he will be able to win back the pawn. So a captures, knight captures, now with a double attack on the knight here. So Magnus needs to capture, captures on b6, a captures, and bishop captures. And now, of course, Svidler goes rook to b8, pressuring the bishop to move, and now he wants to win the b2 pawn. So for the moment, Carlsen up 2 pawns, but Svidler still up the exchange. And here, bishop to d5. Just moving the bishop and allowing rook captures is just great for black. So Magnus finds the in-between, the very nice Zwischenzug, bishop to d5. Attacks the rook, pressures f7, prepares rook to a7 to go after f7. So a lot of possibilities here. And there is one possibility, for example, if Svidler wants to maybe simplify, he could just try and give back the exchange with rook captures on b6 to give back the exchange and win a pawn. And we would get something like rook a8 check, king here, and now, for example, captures on c4 and rook captures on b2. And we would get this position where Carlsen is up a pawn, but it's bishops of opposite color, and well, it's hard to say if you would be able to play this for more than a draw. Yes, you will win the f7 pawn after check, but also the c3 pawn will fall. So it's hard to say if this would most likely be a draw. But Svidler decided to play for the win, so he keeps his material advantage. He brings the rook back to c8. And now Carlsen again with the only move that gives white some edge to fight for more than a draw. We have rook to a7. Now going after rook captures on f7, and it's a very dangerous idea, of course. If rook captures on b6, which is the strongest idea for Svidler, then Carlsen's idea was rook captures on f7 with check. King to e8, if you go here, then of course you allow very nasty discoveries. A rook could easily be won, either of the rooks. So king e8 was the idea, rook captures on g7. And now Svidler would have to find rook to d8, the only move that allows black to to continue fighting, because if you capture the b2 pawn, then you run into the very ugly rook to g8 check, king d7 defending, and bishop to e6 check, now forcing the capture. And after captures, we get this position where now it's a king and rook endgame, but with Carlsen being up 2 pawns, this would be winning. So basically, the point is that Svidler needs to find this line with rook captures, allowing this, and then find this rook to d8 move to continue fighting. However, Svidler in this position on move 31 suffered Kasparov's fate, and instead of rook captures on b6, he played the rook to b7. He suffered a mouse slip, and the rook lands one square too early, and it was in this position that Svidler immediately resigned without even waiting for Carlsen to capture, because now it's a free rook, and I mean, again. So I believe these were the only 2 mouse slips in the entire tournament, the one Kasparov suffered against Fabi, and the one Svidler suffered against Magnus. And like I said, this game had huge impact on the standings because, well, Carlsen, of course, was fighting for first place. And yeah, everyone thought that Carlsen would win first place. In the final round, Carlsen faced Levon Aronian, and they drew the game, so he didn't go all the way. But Svidler also helped out because Svidler had a winning position against Nakamura, who was also fighting for first place in the final round, but in the end only got a draw. So final standings, here they are. Carlsen and Nakamura, both with 6 points, both share first place. And it's one of the rare tournaments where it's actually a tie. They don't have Armageddon or any sort of tie break. So Carlsen and Nakamura are joint winners of this year's Chess 960 tournament. So we haven't had joint winners for quite a long time. Followed by Levon Aronian in 3rd place. He fought Kasparov, and Kasparov took a draw from Aronian on day 3. Very important draw for Garry, and very important half a point for Levon. Then Fabiano Caruana in 4th place with 5.5, also sharing with Levon. Wesley So with 5 points. Then we have Maxime Vacher-Lagrave, who got a lot of points after starting the first day with 3 losses. Then Linier Dominguez also with 4, and Garry Kasparov in 8th place with 3.5. If Garry hadn't suffered that mouse slip against Fabiano, probably it would be at least half a point, but most likely it would be a full point. So Kasparov in this lineup almost on 50% if it weren't for the mouse slip. Then Peter Svidler with 3 points also suffered a mouse slip against Magnus, and Alireza Firouzja in last place with 2.5 points. So there you have it. That's the tournament and the standings. I do hope you enjoyed it and this game. It was a really lovely game. Beautiful exchange sacrifice by Magnus, and a very, very strong play by Peter. In the end, it's a shame it was decided by a mouse slip, because this game had a lot more play to go with it. But yeah, maybe we show a few more games. If you guys have any suggestions, do use #suggestion in the comments, and I will go through them. Maybe we'll have time to show at least one more from the Chess 960 tournament, but we'll see how it goes. So yeah, once again, I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Kim Farnik, Vašista Sriram Jayapati, Ivan Vlahek, Kujundina Sriram Jayapati, and Andrea Grossoni for contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the next tournament we have in line. It's a double round robin, also from the St. Louis. Checking up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent start of your week.